He gave her a different name, a different city, a different love story. But he made one fatal mistake. He never imagined that his wife and his fiancée would end up sitting 3 feet apart from each other in the same office. Aurora Hill had just landed the best job of her career, senior reputation director, harbor views, a fresh start, everything she had worked for. And on day one, before she had even turned on her computer, she was staring at her husband's face in a picture frame that belonged to someone else. He was engaged. He had been building this for 3 years. He had used her money, her name, her signature, forged, to fund the life he was giving another woman. She could have screamed. She could have grabbed that silver frame and thrown it through the window. Instead, she looked at the photo and said, "He looks very dashing." Then she went to work, not at her new job, but on him. What Aurora did next is a masterclass in quiet, calculated, lethal patience. She gathered every document, every wire transfer, every forged signature. She built a case so airtight that by the time she walked into that investor gala and stepped up to the podium, there was nothing he could say, nothing he could do, nothing left to save. Because she didn't just expose him, she made sure everyone with the power to destroy him was in the same room when she did. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after being betrayed is not fight back immediately. It's making sure that when you do, there's no way out for them. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, and drop a comment, because your voice matters, and this community is built on stories like this one. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and real emotional value.
The first image Aurora put up on that giant screen wasn't some slick corporate logo. It was a photograph, plain and simple. Not of her and Ethan Carter, the man they were all there to honor, but of some other woman's desk, a little shrine in an office somewhere. When she started talking, her voice wasn't shaky. It was blade sharp, filled with a cold, hard clarity that made the whole room go still. She talked about the silver frame on that desk, the one holding a picture of the same man she'd woken up next to that morning. For the next 21 minutes, she held that entire room hostage in the quiet hell of her discovery. I'm Madison Clark, and I've watched Aurora build her entire life. I thought I knew what devastation looked like, but this wasn't just some messy breakup. Aurora was the CEO of a life he'd tried to erase, and she was staging the most brutal, methodical takeover I'd ever seen. Her words weren't angry. They were exhibits, laid out one by one for the jury of his peers. She started exactly where we started that first night, with the money. This city is filled with guys who look just like Ethan Carter, men who use ambition to hide a black hole of appetites. Aurora, his wife, walked them through the perfect, transparent world they had built together. Then she showed them his world, a shadow ledger of pure deception he'd been calling a career. She told them to forget the wedding photos and look at the wire transfers. The very first thread she pulled for that silent ballroom was a transfer from a Tuesday night, sent long after midnight. $50,000 wired to something called Oak Ridge Partners, LLC. I remember the night we found it. It was the first sign that her marriage wasn't a partnership. It was an asset he was gutting for parts. Aurora, standing up there looking like a queen, remembered meeting the woman who owned that desk. She introduced herself as Chloe Jensen, she said, her voice impossibly steady. She told me how excited she was to finally meet me. The cruelty of it just hung there in the air, thick enough to choke on. There was no jealousy in her voice, just this deep Arctic pity. Chloe Jensen wasn't the enemy. She was just another line item on his fraudulent expense report, a bad investment he'd made with stolen money. Aurora's mission, as she'd told me countless times, was to dismantle the fraud without taking down the young woman he'd duped along with everyone else. That desk was just a memorial to a man who was, for all legal purposes, already gone. The next slide showed loan agreements, investment papers. We all saw her signature, Aurora Hayes, written in perfect cursive. "I have never seen these documents in my life," she said, her tone flat, as an arrow pointed to a capital call from 14 months ago. Then she put her passport signature next to the one on the loan. The forgery was incredible. To anyone but us, it looked real. She told them about the forensic examiner's report, the one that landed in her inbox just 48 hours before the gala. We'd huddled over her laptop, reading about the microscopic hesitations in the letter A, the tiny pen lifts no one would ever see. His entire secret life, his whole relationship with Chloe, wasn't funded by his success. It was funded by federal wire fraud. Ethan Carter's private life was a criminal conspiracy. Aurora let the picture of the desk linger on the screen. It was from a trip to the mountains. She described the way the light hit, the way her husband, Ethan, was smiling at the person taking the picture. A private smile, one she'd thought was hers for over a decade. But she told the room her focus wasn't the betrayal, it was the calendar. Credit card statements filled the screen. The rental cabin, the expensive dinners, the gas to get up there. All of it charged to their joint account. He didn't just cheat on her, he made her pay for it. The crime wasn't just infidelity, it was grand theft. A quiet gasp went through the crowd. It was the sound of a multi-million-dollar deal shattering into a million pieces. "She told me it was a beautiful frame," Aurora said, her voice finally hardening with the steel I knew so well. She wasn't a woman falling apart. She was the first responder cataloging the evidence at a crime scene. When Chloe Jensen had used his full name, Ethan Carter, that became the key that unlocked everything. His legal name, attached to a life he was living illegally. Aurora was his wife. Chloe was his fiancée. That one word, she told them, was his confession. On the screen, she drew two columns, Ethan the husband and Ethan the fiancé, both drinking from the same poisoned well of stolen money. The details she recalled were breathtaking. She'd noticed his watch in the photo. She'd leaned in, pretending to admire the picture. But I knew she was confirming the serial number of a major marital asset. Her next move, she explained, was to find out where it came from. It was a chronograph with a navy blue face. He'd told her it was a bonus from work. Our research proved it was bought with money siphoned from their main investment fund, the same one he'd used her forged signature to borrow against. He wasn't just wearing a watch, he was wearing the evidence. That mountain trip 14 months back wasn't just a romantic weekend. The date lined up to the exact day with that $50,000 transfer to Oak Ridge Partners. It wasn't a vacation, it was the launch party for his second life, and Aurora had picked up the tab. He was a man telling one woman he loved her while embezzling from the other. Aurora even quoted the polite chatter from Chloe. "He's so handsome. How long have you two been engaged?" She wasn't just making small talk that day. She was taking a deposition inside her own head. 3 years. A timeline flashed on the screen. For 3 solid years, every last-minute business trip on his calendar lined up perfectly with a romantic weekend away with Chloe. Every client dinner matched a cash withdrawal that paid for their dates. He wasn't building a company, he was servicing a secret second mortgage on his life. He was funding 2 entirely separate, expensive lives. While he was telling Aurora they needed to cut back, he was bankrolling a lavish fall wedding for his fiancée. Aurora's job tonight, she said, was to give everyone the true cost of that lie. The name Blackwell House appeared on the screen, circled in red. We'd subpoenaed their records, a $10,000 non-refundable deposit for the wedding venue, paid by Oak Ridge Partners, the shell company. It was a perfect circle of lies, a beautiful wedding built on an ugly fraud. Ethan Carter wasn't just a cheater, he was a one-man crime syndicate operating against his own marriage. And Aurora, the brilliant, calm woman at that podium, had just handed them the entire case file. She'd seen the hurricane coming, and instead of running, she started measuring the wind speed. The line she quoted from the fiancé, "I'm so happy for you," was the final quiet kill shot. This wasn't some fling. This was a parallel life, built from the ground up. Chloe Jensen wasn't a mistress. She was being groomed as the replacement wife. That icy feeling she described was real. I felt it spread through me as I watched from the side of the room. By the time Aurora had gotten back to her office that day weeks ago, the plan for his demolition was already being drafted. She wasn't a wife discovering an affair. She was a general surveying the enemy's position before ordering the strike. The moment she'd logged into her computer that day, the man they all thought they knew as Ethan Carter was erased. He thought he was the architect of his own grand design. Aurora was just serving him the demolition notice. He built 2 lives. She was making sure he'd be left with 0. His world wasn't just going to fall apart. It was going to be methodically dismantled in a federal court. This was never just about a divorce. She told the stunned room, cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Chloe Jensen wasn't just the other woman. She was about to be the government's star witness, and she didn't even know it yet. She told them about a welcome lunch at her firm, where Chloe had been introduced as a new junior associate. Aurora had sat through the entire thing, listening to her colleagues toast a man who was a complete work of fiction. She ate her salad and took mental notes. While her team was celebrating a new beginning, she was planning an absolute end. Every innocent question they asked Chloe about her wedding was another nail Ethan was letting them hammer into his own coffin. The man who said he worked 80-hour weeks was, in a way, telling the truth. He was just managing 2 full-time jobs, one in finance, one in fraud, and the auditors had finally shown up. His wife listened to the fairy tale, knowing she held the ledger that proved it was all a lie. The white flowers, the anniversary dinners, the surprise trips, they were all real. They were just delivered to the wrong woman. She had cross-referenced the dates of his romantic gestures with the cash flow statements from Oak Ridge Partners. He was a perfect husband, just not to her. The stress he'd been showing at home wasn't from his job. It was the crushing weight of maintaining 2 separate realities. The quiet nights they spent at home were his prison. The 5-star restaurants with his fiancée were his escape, all of it paid for with the future he was stealing from Aurora. Charleston Wharf. I watched Everett's face when she said it, and I saw the faintest twitch. We'd found that property deed weeks ago. Unit 12B. Funneled through Stonebridge Holdings 2 years before. He hadn't just found his mistress an apartment, he'd liquidated his marriage to buy it, hiding it behind layers of corporate bullshit. The story he'd fed Aurora about a busted water heater at their house was a lie. He was crying poor to his wife while funding a full-scale renovation for his girlfriend. The man wasn't cheap. He was a parasite, draining one life to feed another. And tonight, Aurora was here to make him history. For the last 3 weeks, I'd been the one force-feeding Aurora coffee as she lived by the cold, grinding sound of that scanner. Her mission started the moment she realized his betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a complete dismantling of their life together. This wasn't revenge. It was a hostile, methodical, and very public takeover. The first thing we went after, she and I, was the ring. It was more than just a diamond. It was the cornerstone of his fraud. She put the wire transfer on screen, $97,000 for a perfect emerald-cut diamond, siphoned from a joint fund meant for their future. He sold it to Delaney Brooks as a promise. For Aurora, it was the loose thread she used to unravel his whole damn life. This was a man who told my best friend of 7 years he found flashy wealth repulsive. He sold her an image of a thoughtful, quiet intellectual while he was off building some tacky fantasy for the other woman. Seeing his pale, stunned face in the audience, I knew we weren't just watching a liar get caught. We were watching a fortress of secrets get blown to pieces. He'd given that girl, Delaney, a diamond that glittered under the ballroom lights, a symbol of what he called their future. But Aurora, my Aurora, stood at that podium and calmly ripped that future apart, calling the ring what it really was, the liquidated pieces of her own family's inheritance, washed through 3 shell companies before it ever saw a jeweler's box. His company, Stone Vale Advisory, was the next target. We'd all seen the marketing crap, the self-made man building an empire from nothing. Aurora calmly explained how the $500,000 in startup money wasn't from some tough-won bank loan. It came straight from the equity on the home she owned with him, Everett Stone. She showed their signatures on the loan document, his bold and hers right next to it. And then came the knockout. A forgery, she told the silent room. A damn good one, but a fake. He hadn't built a company. He'd robbed a marriage, using his own wife as collateral for a life he was planning with someone else. This new partnership with our firm, Astor Vale, was supposed to be his crowning achievement. The final step in laundering himself and the money clean. A cold dread hit me. He was using Aurora's stolen inheritance to build a company that would then merge with the firm where she, his wife, was the new senior reputation director. The audacity was breathtaking. I could practically see our now useless due diligence files shredding themselves in my mind. The money trail she laid out was disgustingly clean. Marital funds built Stone Vale. Our firm's valuation would make him legitimate, and he'd walk away clean. The name, Stone Vale, was suddenly a sick joke. For what felt like a lifetime but was probably only a few minutes, Aurora held that entire room in her hand. This wasn't some spurned wife lashing out. This was a general executing a battle plan. I looked at Everett's ghostly white face and knew this was more than a financial audit. It was the complete and total demolition of a man. She was never going to let this be some quiet, messy divorce. This was a public execution, a masterclass in strategic destruction. And she started with the money. Because after all these years, I know that's always where the deepest truths are buried. The cruelest part, I think, was for Delaney. Aurora, her new mentor, had praised her work on this very presentation. She had played the supportive colleague, all while her lawyers were drawing up the documents to utterly annihilate the man Delaney thought she was building a life with. It was his own stories that buried him. Aurora recounted his tale about a chance meeting in Chicago, a whirlwind love affair. You could feel the air leave the room as Delaney Brooks realized it was the exact same script he'd used on her. He wasn't just a con man, he was a plagiarist of his own lies. He made both of them feel like they were the only person who ever really understood him. The truth, exposed right there for everyone to see, was that there was nothing there to understand. He was just a void, a mirror reflecting the desires of whoever was closest. The only real Everett Stone existed in bank statements and forged signatures. I thought about that girl, Delaney, sitting maybe 50 feet from Aurora, probably with a framed photo of her and Everett on her desk back at the office. A photo that was a monument to a lie, paid for by the woman whose life he was systematically looting. This whole night, this whole spectacle, was about shattering that frame. The instant their CEO introduced her, I saw it all lock into place in my memory. Aurora Stone, Director of Reputation Management. She'd been playing a long game from the day she accepted the job, coolly shaking hands with the woman sleeping with her husband. She saw that picture on Delaney's desk and knew this was a war, not just an affair. Every casual chat in the hallway, every time she had to listen to Delaney talk about how stressed Everett was, it was all reconnaissance. She wasn't making a friend, she was confirming her target's location, meticulously tightening the net. It wasn't Delaney's idea to ask Aurora for help with the big presentation. I see that so clearly now. It was a honey trap, set with terrifying precision by Aurora, who made herself the only person who could possibly save the day. Delaney Brooks must have thought she was just getting some help from a talented new colleague. She had no idea she was personally handing over the murder weapon. She thought she was building her fiancé's future. In reality, she was signing his death warrant. That smile Aurora must have offered her. It would have seemed so genuine, like a problem solver's relief. But I know that smile. It was the calm, satisfied look of a hunter watching the prey wander right into the crosshairs. It was the moment she knew it was over. Their office friendship was never real. It was a black ops mission. And seeing her at that podium, her voice unshakable, I knew she had sworn to herself he would never, ever see the end coming. My God, the fallout from this would be catastrophic. This gala was her chosen ground. Every single detail was a weapon. Delaney's emerald dress, perfectly matching the ring, a ring we now knew was bought with stolen money. This wasn't a celebration, it was a closing argument, and we were all the jury. The timing was flawless. Their own CEO, Charles Harrison, who was clearly on our side, had just finished a glowing introduction. The visionary founder of Stone Vale Advisory, Mr. Everett Stone. They let him stand there. They let him soak in the applause. They let him think he'd finally made it. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. That last kiss he gave Delaney right before was a lie broadcast on a jumbotron. He whispered something in her ear, and she just lit up. And the whole time, Aurora was waiting in the wings, her hand on the detonator. Charles Harrison went back to the mic, and his next words were the signal we'd been waiting for. A deal this big, he said, required the best person to protect the company's image, and he was honored, he boomed, to introduce their new Director of Reputation Management, Aurora Stone. The name dropped into the quiet room like a brick. Stone. She used his name. The name on the house, on the stolen accounts, on the forged papers. I watched Delaney's expression curdle, the dream twisting into a nightmare right on her face. I looked over at Everett Stone and I watched a man get erased in one perfect, stunning moment. The color drained from his face, that smug confidence collapsing into pure animal panic. His eyes darted from his wife on the stage to his fiancée beside him, a trapped rat looking for an escape that wasn't there. Aurora on that stage was terrifyingly beautiful, composed, in control, and glorious in her victory. The smile she gave wasn't for the crowd. It was just for him, a final private confirmation of his doom before she delivered the final blow. She thanked Charles, her voice as sharp as a razor. She let the silence hang there, her eyes locked on his. "And I am especially proud," she said, her voice reaching every person in that ballroom, "to support the vision of my brilliant husband." That word, husband, was a death sentence. "Our 7 years of marriage have been full of surprises," she said. "But Everett, this partnership is your masterpiece." And just like that, it was over. The silence in that ballroom was absolute. Then you heard it. The rustle of 1,000 people turning to stare, a single unified wave of pity and morbid curiosity breaking over Brooke Thompson. Her entire world hadn't just been shattered, it was revealed to be a ghost, and my job, helping Aurora pick up the pieces, was only just starting. It all started with a single picture on a desk, a snapshot of a perfect sun-kissed life in the Hamptons that was nothing but a lie. The night Aurora called me from the parking garage, her voice wasn't tearful. It was chillingly steady, the voice of a general confirming the enemy's location on a map. His name was Preston Vance, and to all of us he was the golden boy. But from the second my best friend Aurora saw that photo on his assistant's desk, she declared a war, a silent, methodical war that began with her calling me and whispering, "Maddie, find everything," and ended with the public execution of a man's entire life. For 3 solid years, we discovered, Preston Vance had run 2 separate lives with the cold-blooded efficiency of a hedge fund manager. He balanced his assets, our time, Aurora's inheritance, his fabricated promises, like a sociopath playing the market. That gala was simply the day his entire portfolio was brutally liquidated. For the last 3 weeks, I've been living inside the wreckage of Aurora's marriage. The story she practiced telling me of a fairy tale life that was just a one-man con. Preston had been her rock, her whole world. Now my only job was to help her detonate the bomb and pray the shrapnel didn't hit us. The future he sold Brooke was the exact same one he was building with Aurora. A wedding, a trip to Italy, a house on the water, all of it bankrolled by accounts Aurora didn't even know existed. She was picking out kitchen tiles for their home while I was staring at the wire transfers that were slowly draining it dry. His little charity venture was just another scheme. When Aurora found the payment to Brooke's brother for a startup, I felt my blood run cold. Preston called it seed money. Aurora called it what it was, a brilliant way to funnel cash out of their marriage disguised as philanthropy. He wasn't helping her family, he was using them as a laundromat. The details she unearthed were like hairline fractures in a foundation I'd always thought was solid, things I'd brushed off. A hushed call on their balcony in Miami was evidence of a burner phone. A last-minute work emergency in Chicago was a weekend trip with Brooke. Every excuse was a thread, and standing at that podium, Aurora was about to pull them all. Preston had a way about him, a charm that felt like old money and fresh lies. He could smooth over any fight with an expensive dinner and an apology that made you feel crazy for ever doubting him. That girl, Brooke, had obviously bought into it completely, because seeing the truth would have meant accepting her own ruin. Aurora didn't have that luxury. She had to plan for it. The whole demolition went down at the Sterling Gala. We were there to celebrate his firm's new partnership, a deal he had apparently worked on for months. I watched Brooke, his date for the night, in a sapphire dress the exact shade of the corporate logo, beaming with a pride that was about to turn to ash. He was the main event, and she was the prop he'd brought to complete the scene. That ballroom was his stage. I watched him move through the crowd, a hand on Brooke's lower back that screamed possession, not affection. "This is Brooke," he'd said to a colleague, his smile a perfect polished performance. She thought she was the star of his movie, but she was just an extra. And then I saw Aurora. In a sea of glitter and champagne, her simple black dress felt like a judgment. I saw their eyes meet across the room, Brooke's and Aurora's, and I watched the exact second a fantasy slammed head-on into a balance sheet. The nerve, the absolute audacity of bringing them both to the same event was almost impressive. When the CEO, Marcus Thorne, got on stage, the air got thick. He started talking about vision and partnership, and I saw Brooke squeeze Preston's hand, her face lit up with adoration. He smiled back at her, a look so fake you could see your own reflection in it. "And now I want to bring up the man who made this happen," Marcus boomed. "Mr. Preston Vance." The room exploded in applause. Brooke jumped to her feet, clapping so hard her palms were red, her smile a perfect, clueless monument to the lie standing right next to her. This was supposed to be his big moment. "Preston, come on up," Marcus beckoned. As Preston started for the stage, Marcus held up his glass. But as we all know, a man like this doesn't get to the top alone. He owes so much to the incredible support of his amazing wife of 7 years. Wife. 7 years. The words just hung there, killing the sound in the room. I locked my eyes on Brooke's face. You could see her mind racing, trying to make the math work. It wouldn't. The clapping sputtered out, replaced by a low, hungry murmur. So let's give a huge round of applause for the incredible Aurora Stone. The spotlight swung off of frozen Preston and landed squarely on my best friend. On Aurora. On his wife. For me, it was the final, satisfying click of a plan perfectly executed. The late-night strategy sessions, the whiteboard covered in timelines, the second phone we'd found. He wasn't living a double life. He was running 2 cons at once. Brooke wasn't his future. She was just the riskiest bet he'd ever made. The first clue, as Aurora would later explain from that podium, was that innocent-looking photo on Brooke's desk. A perfect day at a polo match, a snapshot selling a beautiful, toxic lie. It was a marketing photo for a life that was never for sale. Someone from her office had recognized him, because Preston wasn't just some rising star. He was a regular on the Boston Society pages, always with Aurora on his arm. A 10-minute Google search, the kind I did in the first hour, would have blown his cover. But love makes you skip the due diligence. Their entire 3-year story, as Aurora laid it out for 200 of the city's most influential people, was a fraudulent enterprise. The apartment was a rental. The promises were verbal contracts he never intended to honor. In that ballroom, the whispers were the jury, and Brooke went from fiancé to co-conspirator. $186,000. Aurora said the number without a single tremor in her voice. The exact amount for a condo down payment. She traced it for the entire room, from a joint marital account through a shell company and into escrow. It was a perfect, beautiful crime. Preston just stood there on the stage, his $1,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap rental. The room was now a silent tribunal. Brooke wasn't just the other woman anymore. She was the unknowing vehicle for a felony he'd committed against his wife, his partners, and everyone in that room. For Brooke, the ringing in her ears was the sound of her life imploding. For me, it was the sweet sound of the mission being accomplished. The faces in the crowd were a blur of shock to her. For me, they were the jury delivering a verdict we had already written. That 5-minute speech burned Brooke's future to the ground. But for Aurora, it was a controlled demolition. She hadn't just exposed a liar. She'd handed his partners the flight recorder from the crash, giving them everything they needed to make sure Preston Vance never flew again. The late-night deal calls Brooke thought were so important were, as Aurora revealed, calls with offshore bankers and with Aurora herself, who was at their home while he claimed to be in a different city. In a way, he wasn't lying. He was closing out one life to finance another. The condo on the water was the crown jewel of his con. He managed all the paperwork, Aurora explained, because it was packed with forgeries. She calmly mentioned the findings from a handwriting expert. Brooke's signature wasn't just faked, it was a ghost, a name he used to authorize the theft of his wife's money. Tonight, this gala was meant to be his coronation. The diamond on Brooke's finger, Aurora informed the stunned audience, was purchased after liquidating a trust fund set up by Aurora's grandfather. Every brick of the life he was building with Brooke was stolen from the foundation of the one he already had. "You look stunning," I'd heard him murmur to Brooke when they walked in. It was a line delivered by a man who knew how to stage a scene. He wasn't building a future with her. He was staging a hostile takeover of his own life, and he'd just positioned Brooke to take on all the debt. But then the company's real majority shareholder walked in. Aurora moved toward that stage not like a woman scorned, but like a corporate raider about to liquidate a toxic asset. She didn't even glance at Brooke. Her voice was crystal clear. "Preston," she said, cutting him off before he could even speak, "you've become a very difficult man to get a hold of." The tactical brilliance of that opening line sent a wave of awe through me. Aurora Stone was never the victim in this story. She was always the consequence. When Brooke took a step forward, as if to defend him, Aurora finally looked at her. Her expression was one of cold, clinical pity. "The only mistake," she said, her voice like a scalpel, "was my husband of 7 years thinking he could use our joint assets to finance his affair." And with that one sentence, the deal, the partnership, and the career of Preston Vance were all over. He just didn't know it yet. For those next 3 weeks, sleep was basically a myth. The Northgate board was in constant emergency meetings. We weren't just pulling out of a deal, we were preparing for a complete and utter public demolition. Grant Harrison was about to find out that the personal portfolio he'd been building had triggered a single devastating margin call. The very first number our forensic guys flagged was $186,000, a wire transfer disguised to look like a simple capital investment. It was the down payment on a lie. By the time we were finished, the whiteboard in Aurora's apartment looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream, a tangled mess of shell companies and illegal money moves, all leading back to him. Everyone saw the takedown at the gala, but Aurora told me how she really found out. It was a picture sitting on a new hire's desk, just a few feet from her own office. She said it wasn't the affair that gutted her, it was the gall. He hadn't just cheated. He'd set up his other life as a venture-backed startup, practically in the same corporate campus as his marriage. A stupid photo from a ski trip turned into our smoking gun. He'd told Aurora he was at some tech conference in Singapore. The expense reports he filed with his own company, which we got our hands on, proved the whole thing was a lie. His entire affair was bankrolled by their joint accounts and his corporate card. Every candlelit dinner was a receipt for theft. She was the perfect target, I told our lead attorney, talking about Chloe. She's young, driven, and he had her completely fooled. I wasn't judging her. I was assessing the damage. Grant hadn't just found a girlfriend, he'd acquired an unregistered, off-the-books asset he could exploit for his own agenda. The second Aurora told me he'd introduced Chloe as his fiancée, the personal betrayal felt absolute. But for me, and for the Northgate board, it was simpler. That was proof of his intent to commit wire fraud. The diamond on Chloe's finger wasn't a symbol of love, it was stolen goods. I really thought our due diligence on Harrison Ventures had been rock solid. On paper, it was this scrappy, brilliant company out of Delaware with financials that looked bulletproof. We saw a genius in Grant Harrison. We completely missed that his entire company was a ghost, built not on investment but on the leveraged credit and forged signature of his wife. Grant loved to say, "Trust is the ultimate currency." The irony of that is so heavy now it feels like I could choke on it. While he was selling Northgate on corporate integrity, he was cashing out at home, draining their home equity line to pay for getaways with a woman from our own company, from accounts Aurora thought were for their future. I saw Chloe Parker at his table, just glowing with pride. She was the one who had championed his deal, who pushed his presentation through our internal channels with this passionate, glowing review. She honestly thought she was backing a visionary. What she was really doing was handing her lover's wife a loaded pistol, right down to the metadata proving he stole the damn thing from Aurora Harrison's personal cloud. When the slide with his so-called proprietary framework popped up on the big screen, I felt this weird flicker of recognition. Then Aurora put her own slide on the screen right next to it, from a keynote she gave 2 years ago. It wasn't just close, it was a carbon copy. In that 1 second, Grant Harrison went from our brilliant new partner to a common thief. The most incredible thing was the sound of her voice. Not a single tremor of anger, no hint of the woman scorned. It was the calm, ice-cold tone of a CEO announcing a hostile takeover. "He is presenting my intellectual property," she said, her eyes locked on our board members, "to my own prospective partners." This wasn't a messy breakup. This was a corporate execution. The silence that blanketed that ballroom was absolute, crushing. We were all caught in a perfectly engineered trap that had just slammed shut. By letting him get on that stage and deliver that stolen speech, Aurora had orchestrated his public confession, totally admissible and impossible to deny, right under the bright lights of our own annual gala. I automatically glanced back toward the AV booth, thinking some tech guy had made a massive mistake. But the split screen was too perfect, too clean. His pitch deck on the left, her original work on the right. This was no accident. Our entire gala had been hijacked for an ambush. My eyes shot back to Chloe Parker, her proud smile just crumbling into a mask of utter bewilderment. I thought about all the times Grant had mentioned his fiancée's unwavering support in our meetings. It wasn't just a charming personal detail, it was calculated. Chloe wasn't just his champion, she was his unknowing spy. Before she walked into that ballroom, the last text I sent Aurora was 4 simple words: "The stage is set." For Grant, this night was supposed to be his triumph. For the few of us who knew the truth, it was Judgment Day. He placed his hand on Chloe's waist, a picture-perfect con man, just as the main lights started to dim. The sheer nerve of including an integrity framework in his proposal was darkly beautiful. I had already flagged that entire section for the file we were building to send to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He was literally selling corporate ethics built on stolen ideas, paid for by draining his own family's finances. It was a flawlessly symmetrical, self-inflicted takedown. Then slide 42 came up. Perspective Strategic Integration. It was the heart of his entire pitch, and as it filled the screen, Aurora Harrison's original version materialized right beside it, complete with a digital timestamp from 2 years earlier. His magnum opus had just become Exhibit A in his own trial. When Aurora Harrison walked up to the podium instead of our CEO, a wave of confused whispers went through the crowd. She moved not like she was crashing the party, but like she owned the entire venue. I saw Grant's easygoing smile tighten just a little at the corners, the first tiny crack in his perfect veneer. "A partnership," she started, her voice echoing sharp and clear, is built on a foundation of trust. As she said it, the split screen ignited. On the left, the Harrison Ventures logo. On the right, the emblem of her old consulting firm. This wasn't a business pitch anymore. It was a declaration of war. Her eyes scanned the front tables and landed with laser-like focus on Chloe Parker. "It is, as a matter of fact, my work," she went on, "stolen by a man I trusted." Every single word landed like a judge's gavel, delivered in front of 200 of the industry's most influential people. The silence in that room became a weapon. He was trapped in the spotlight, no one to back him up, nowhere to run. And then she delivered the final, soul-crushing blow. A man who, for the last 10 years, I have called my husband. You could feel the collective gasp suck all the oxygen out of the ballroom. As if someone flipped a switch, 100 heads swiveled to stare at Chloe Parker. The poor girl looked like she'd been slapped. She was definitely collateral damage, but she was also the living, breathing proof of his decade-long lie. For Aurora to get her justice, his whole world of deceit had to be unraveled for everyone to see. I thought of the diamond on Chloe's finger, which we already knew was bought with a wire from account number 7345. I thought of the apartment they shared, leased with a forged signature on a joint financial document. Every single piece of the life she thought she had with him was just another piece of evidence against him. Aurora Harrison didn't just out a cheat, she executed a corporate assassination with chilling precision. By the time she stepped off that stage, she had vaporized his company, legally nullified our partnership offer, and launched a fraud investigation that would strip him of everything. I saw one of our VPs trying to say something to Chloe, whose entire reality had just been annihilated on a 20-foot screen. Up on the stage, Aurora stood completely still, a woman who had walked through hell and come back only to systematically burn down the man who sent her there. And then the last, sickest piece of the puzzle clicked into place for me. Chloe's hiring 6 months ago. Grant had personally recommended her for the job. It wasn't him being a supportive boyfriend. It was corporate espionage. He had planted a Trojan horse inside Northgate to give himself an edge. He never needed a supporter. He needed an informant who didn't know she was one. Someone to feed him details about our company's internal dynamics, our strategic goals, our key players. Her fierce loyalty to him wasn't just a bonus in their relationship. It was the main reason he got her the job. Looking at Chloe's pale, stunned face, it was obvious she wasn't a partner in crime. She was a tool. He had deliberately placed her at the center of his supposed victory to make sure her own career ambitions were tied directly to his success. It was his most cruel and brilliant move. I have this perfect, vivid memory of Chloe in our boardroom just last week, giving us a confident thumbs up as she pointed to a slide in that very presentation. In her moment of pride, she was showing us the murder weapon, shining with her fiancé's fingerprints. She thought she was helping him build their future. As Aurora took one last slow sip of water, her composure was unbreakable. This was a woman who had weighed every single risk and calculated every possible result. She hadn't come here to make a scene. She had come here to close out a decade-long account, and she was doing it completely on her own terms. For 3 straight weeks, the entire universe at Northgate had revolved around Grant Harrison. He was the genius we were about to crown our new partner. My only real job that night was to smile, shake his hand, and officially welcome him aboard. We thought we weren't just vetting a company, we were betting the house on the man. Our official third-party audit had given his financials a glowing report. But the real proof wasn't in some accountant's ledger. It was hidden in the metadata of a PowerPoint file. The airtight case we thought we had for a partnership was, as we were all now painfully aware, built on absolutely nothing. It was 9 o'clock at night when the life Aurora Hill had built was torched to the ground, and I was the only person she called to watch it burn. He was at a bar, she told me, probably celebrating, the king of his own tiny, fraudulent world, while she was in a parking garage preparing to blow it all to hell. She never cried, not once. Over the next few weeks, in the war room we made of her apartment, she laid out the evidence like a general planning an invasion. The systematic bleeding of their shared accounts into his shell company, Apex Sentinel. The roadmap of his betrayal was stark, meticulous, and damning. My head spun as we pieced it together. The startup capital for his company, the security deposit on his girlfriend's apartment, even the diamond on that other woman's hand, it all came from their joint finances. It was stolen. The sheer, calculated audacity of it left me breathless. Watching her tape another bank statement to the wall, I knew this was more than just getting even. Her voice was too steady, her movements too precise. This was a creditor, and in front of the whole world she was going to collect on a debt that had been compounding for a decade. She was bricking up every last escape route. For 10 years, she'd tell me during those late nights, she believed she was in a partnership with Caleb Hayes. He had this drive she thought was genius, a vision she didn't just support but bankrolled herself. He spent a decade building a lie, she said, her voice flat, and I was the one who paid for the materials. She called him a ghost. His fiancée, Aurora said one night, her finger tapping a picture of a smiling blonde, Paige, is a junior analyst in your tech division. He got her the job. The raw, unbelievable nerve of it hung in the air between us. He had built his other life right under her nose. In that instant, the whole sickening puzzle snapped together. Of course, he would hide his mistress inside their own company. It was the most arrogant power move imaginable. In my entire life, I have never seen such a brazen display of sociopathic confidence. They had almost given this monster everything. That form, I breathed, pointing my wine glass at the screen, at a spousal guarantee. The one where he tied your brownstone to that fake commercial loan. She just gave me a sharp, cold little nod. He told her I was just a bitter ex-wife, a mistake from his 20s, that the house was just an empty shell he was stuck with. I could only stare, my face a mask of the cool fury I'd learned from her over the past few weeks. His monumental arrogance, at least, left a clean paper trail. The agreement felt like steel in my spine. My questions became sharper, more surgical, never about her pain, always about the facts. Caleb's company card shows a lot of West Coast trips, I noted one afternoon, scrolling through endless statement lines. Was he in Seattle on the 14th of last month for that big tech summit? Her focus just sharpened. He was the keynote speaker. How did you find that? A grim smile touched my lips. I'm getting really good at cross-referencing his lies. The subject changed, but the date was now burned into our minds. The certainty of it all was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It was the timestamp on the digital forgery, logged at 2 a.m., precisely when Aurora's flight to the West Coast had taken off. It was the IP address from their home network. This, I thought, is what justice feels like, methodical and absolute. I'd text Aurora our nightly findings, and she'd just listen, her voice hollow when she'd say, "He thinks I'm a fool, Maddie. He thinks love made me stupid." Then came the final preparations for the Astor Vale Gala. It was the biggest night on their corporate calendar, the evening they were set to announce their partnership with Apex Sentinel. It was supposed to be Caleb Hayes' victory lap, but Aurora was turning it into his public execution. We spent a week making her presentation unbreakable, a masterclass in felony fraud that would play out like a thriller for everyone in that room. The night of the gala, the ballroom was buzzing with money and power. Caleb was at the center of it all, a sun pulling everyone into his orbit, with his young fiancée, Paige, on his arm. "This is it," I imagined him whispering to her, "the start of everything." I'd never been so sure I was about to watch a man's life end. I saw Aurora across the room, elegant in a black silk gown, speaking quietly with her CEO. Our eyes met, and I gave her the slightest nod. It was time. Her boss, William Sterling, took the stage. He talked about innovation, synergy, and the incredible future they were all building. Then he started praising their brilliant new partner. He called Caleb Hayes to the stage. I watched, my heart hammering as the man who had nearly destroyed my best friend stood in the spotlight, looking for all the world like a conquering hero. He gave a speech full of false modesty, thanking everyone for their belief in him. "And to mark this fantastic new venture," Sterling announced, taking the microphone back, "I'd like to ask our own Senior Director of Reputation, Aurora Hill, to say a few words about the critical importance of due diligence." A confused whisper went through the crowd. Aurora? It was a strange choice. She moved toward the stage, graceful and calm, and stood right next to her husband. He smiled at her, the perfect picture of a supportive colleague. She gave him nothing back. "Integrity," Aurora began, her voice crisp and clear, filling the massive hall, "is the only true measure of value, especially when that value is intentionally hidden." Behind her, the huge presentation screen lit up, showing a corporate legal document. "Take, for instance," she continued, "the integrity of the financial statements submitted to this firm by the Apex Sentinel Group." I saw Paige's smile falter at her table. Next to Aurora, Caleb had turned to stone. "A partnership," Aurora said, her voice like ice, "that was secured with a $1.5 million commercial loan. A loan, as it turns out, that was acquired through criminal fraud." The document on the screen zoomed in on a highlighted paragraph, "A spousal guarantee of commercial credit." The main asset listed as collateral for that loan was a brownstone in the South End. A chill went through me. I knew that document by heart. To use a shared marital property for a business loan," her voice cut through the silence like a scalpel, "the law is very clear. It requires the notarized, signed consent of the spouse." The image tightened again, this time on the signature line, and there it was, in clear, bold script, Aurora Hill. "The only issue," she said, turning to look directly at the man beside her, "is that I have never seen this document before in my life, because I am Caleb Hayes' wife of 7 years, and that is a forgery of my signature." The room didn't explode. It shattered. It was a silent, catastrophic collapse. Every head turned from Aurora to Caleb to the pale, horrified girl in the green dress. The whispers started like a gas leak. "Wife? 7 years?" The screen changed again, showing the digital audit trail I'd stared at for hours, an IP address, a device ID. This signature was digitally applied at 2 a.m. on the 14th of last month, Aurora announced, her voice ringing like iron, from the desktop computer in his home office, while I was on a red-eye flight to a conference in Seattle. Seattle, the keynote speech, the bulletproof alibi. It clicked into place for everyone in that room with the heavy finality of a bank vault door swinging shut. Every promise he had made, every projection he had sold, it was all one enormous, spectacular lie. The visionary they'd bet the farm on wasn't just unfaithful, he was a criminal, and he was a husband. Paige Larson was a statue in her chair, caught in the indifferent golden light of the chandeliers. The city's most powerful people were staring, their faces a morbid mix of pity and fascination. She was just collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was happening. From the stage, Caleb's eyes met mine, his face a canvas of pure terror as his entire universe burned to the ground. But for one woman in a black dress, the world was finally, beautifully, being set right. The first time I saw her picture, I knew she was the key. It was buried deep in Caleb's private cloud, a photo of a young woman looking at him with the kind of unfiltered adoration that makes people careless. Her name was Paige Larson. My job wasn't to feel sorry for her. It was to figure out her role in his web of lies. She wasn't his partner in crime. She was the foundation of his entire second life. My entire war against Caleb Hayes started with a single photograph. Aurora laid it on the table in my apartment without saying a word. It was a simple 5x7 in a plain silver frame. In it, Caleb was grinning at a young blonde woman, the ocean breeze in her hair. "Nantucket," Aurora finally said, her voice completely empty. He told me he was on a solo work retreat to finish his quarterly projections. For the next 3 weeks, I helped Aurora live in 2 separate realities. In one, we meticulously documented her life, business trips, conferences, anniversaries. In the other, we pieced together the completely fake life Caleb had built with his fiancée, Paige Larson. The week Aurora was in London closing a merger, he and Paige were at home, picking out a golden retriever puppy from a rescue. Listening to Paige's deposition later was like watching some cheap, made-for-TV romance. "He was my rock," she'd said, absolutely certain she was the star of the show. At 28, she was smart enough, but so completely captivated by this man who was, in reality, a monster, hiding in plain sight. And my purpose, I knew, was to help Aurora tear that entire fantasy apart. The Sterling Gala was supposed to be Caleb's coronation. His company, Apex Sentinel, was a major sponsor. They were giving him an award for his supposed charity work. For us, it was the perfect high-profile stage for his downfall. There is no better place to ruin a man who lives for his own image than in front of everyone who helped create it. I personally tracked the money for the diamond necklace he put on Paige. The wire came from a shell company I'd uncovered a couple of weeks before, a ghost account named Nantucket Holdings, LLC. He probably told her, "Tonight is for us," with every word of that lie funded by the money he stole directly from his wife. Aurora's composure that night was something out of a movie. She stood like a sculpture near the silent auction, watching him guide Paige through the glittering room, his hand on her back with this sickening air of ownership. He was the spider, and Aurora was just letting him finish his web before she set it on fire. The fiancé must have felt something was off at least once. "I don't think your director likes me," she mumbled to Caleb. He just laughed it off, smooth as any practiced liar. "She's just all business. That's why she's the best." He had no clue that her one and only business at that moment was his complete and utter ruin. The CEO's speech about Caleb was a masterwork of fiction, a man of absolute integrity, of singular vision. The 3-inch binder on my coffee table told a different story, detailing 23 fraudulent wire transfers Caleb made from their joint accounts, forging Aurora's name on every single one. The host spoke the exact line Aurora and I had planned. A true partner, in every sense of the word. I saw it on the event feed as Paige, her face glowing with adoration, started to rise from her seat, a proud little smile on her face. She was walking right into it. And then, the trap slammed shut. Please welcome to the stage his wife of 7 years, the incredible senior director of our North American division, Aurora Hill Hayes. His full legal name echoed through the ballroom. The entire room went silent. Hayes. It was a public execution, performed with chilling precision. On the big screen, Caleb Hayes' face was just a mask of pure animal panic. His hand flew off Paige's arm like he'd been shocked, and my friend, Aurora, began her slow, steady walk to the stage as the stunned crowd parted for her. Her cold, triumphant eyes locked on the other woman. In that one frozen second, the whole case clicked into focus for me. The picture from Nantucket, the forged signatures, the stolen money. Paige Larson's little fairy tale wasn't a love story at all. It was Exhibit A in a multi-million-dollar fraud case, and the finale was just broadcast live to 500 of the most powerful people in the city. "He promised me our future," Paige had whispered during her deposition weeks later, her voice thin and broken. "He said I was the only thing his life was missing." This was never just about him cheating. It was about how he used emotional trust as a weapon for systematic financial theft. It was his signature move. For me, it always came back to that single photo I kept on my desk, the ferry to Nantucket. Paige laughing, clueless. Aurora saw it and she just knew. He was supposed to be in Zurich closing the Astor Vale deal that week, she told me the day she called. That was the first thread I pulled, and I just kept pulling until his whole rotten life unraveled. Looking back, the man's sheer arrogance was the bedrock of the entire scheme. We all missed it. He'd convinced Paige to turn down a major career opportunity in Denver, calling her his true north, a classic move to isolate his target and make her totally dependent on him. We found out later that his wife, Aurora, had this terrifying level of calm inside his own world. That look she gave Paige wasn't pity, it was an audit. She was mentally cataloging everything he had built with her money, right down to the 3-carat diamond on Paige's finger, which was bought with funds from their joint account. The discovery files had emails from Paige to Aurora that were just painful to read, these clumsy attempts at networking. She saw this powerful executive, never once imagining she was asking for career advice from the woman whose marriage she was helping to destroy. The irony was just sickening. The most chilling story came straight from Aurora. Paige, apparently pointing to a picture of Caleb, had asked her, "He's amazing, isn't he?" And Aurora, looking at the man who had bled millions from her, just replied, "You must be very proud." The gala dress was the last viciously perfect touch. That whole event was meant to be his crowning achievement. Paige, buzzing with nervous excitement, had actually asked Aurora for fashion advice, torn between a white dress and a dark midnight blue one. She was asking her own executioner what to wear. Aurora's advice was a masterclass in psychological warfare. "The blue," she had suggested, "white is for weddings." It was such a calculated, sharp little jab. Midnight blue looks powerful, confident. She was dressing Paige for the slaughter. "You're a lifesaver," Paige had told her, completely oblivious. She had no idea Aurora was just picking out the costume for her public humiliation. That dark blue gown made damn sure that when the bomb finally dropped, she would stand out like a beacon in the blast zone. Our job in the weeks after was to map out the truth buried beneath all that manufactured bliss. While Paige was worrying about her dress, our forensic team was holed up in a data room, flagging forged signatures and tracing laundered money through a maze of ghost companies. The night it all went down, Aurora was with her lawyers, looking like she was carved from ice. Across town, Caleb Stone was a tiger, as Paige had called him. He thought he was the hunter. He was really just the asset being prepped for liquidation, and we were all about to watch. For 3 weeks after everything blew up, I barely slept. The file our team put together started with a picture captioned, "The Big Night." In it, Caleb Hayes was adjusting his tie, his reflection looking cool and composed. I just saw a con man getting into character. His whole performance, we discovered, was scripted. Subpoenaed text messages showed him down on one knee proposing to her. "Tonight, the world sees what we've built," he wrote. He was selling a story, and the ring he put on her finger was paid for with my best friend's inheritance. Our legal team pored over her journals for a week. They were proof of how deep his deception ran. "How could I have ever doubted him?" she wrote on one page. In the margins, our paralegals noted the dates of wire transfers Caleb was making to his fake companies. Her trust was just another line item for him. That downtown apartment was just one more prop for his stage play. The lease had both of their names on it. To Paige Thompson, he was the brilliant fiancé on the verge of a huge success. To our investigators, he was a thief using stolen marital assets to pay for his side piece's apartment. "It's going to be a perfect night, Caleb," she had said to him. The doorman's statement confirmed it. Her belief in that perfection became the cornerstone of the whole lawsuit. It gave us an exact moment in time when his fraud reached its peak. "I'm handling the brand strategy presentation," she'd proudly told him. We found the email where she was fine-tuning the very speech that would ultimately humiliate her. He was using her own talent and hard work to help sharpen the blade he was about to use on her. "They're so lucky to have you," he texted her. Her response was almost tragic. "Oh, I think we're both about to get what we deserve." Our legal team put a big red box around that one. It was the calm right before the hurricane. In my line of work, you get good at seeing through illusions. Caleb Hayes' particular brand of evil was convincing his main victim that she was actually his business partner. He didn't just hide behind her trust, he turned it into a weapon, making her devotion his most valuable and ultimately disposable asset. The stage was set. The investors, our coworkers, everyone was there. And Paige was the unknowing star of the show, waiting for a curtain call that was never going to come. A text he sent her from the car on the way to the gala was the peak of his cold, calculated game. Front and center, I want everyone to see my queen. That wasn't love, it was strategy. Putting her in the front row was the height of his arrogance. The event photographers caught her smiling, holding the arm of the man who was seconds away from blowing up their entire world. The security footage from the ballroom showed Caleb making his rounds. He wasn't just shaking hands, he was securing his last round of dirty money. And Paige stood right by his side, her presence acting as his most convincing and most fraudulent piece of collateral. He was selling them all a fantasy of the future, a visionary leader. To prove fraud, our lawyers had to show he sold the same lie to everyone. Paige's trusting face was our Exhibit A. She believed in him because the life he'd built with her was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. The dream he pitched the investors was the same one he sold to her, just with a different set of numbers. He used her vision of their shared future, a life under those fancy chandeliers, as proof of his own legitimacy. Her love was his credit score. Aurora told me flat out, if that showcase goes well, it's over. He was right. One good night and the merger would be unstoppable, giving him all the capital he planned to steal before she could lock him out of their accounts. He was so close to having it all, the top-floor office, a seat on the board, the validation he craved. His entire con was about to be legally binding. Our team had been pulling all-nighters for weeks, racing to prove his entire reality was built on theft. He was using his brilliance to build a new world for us. I remember her reading that line from his deposition over the phone, her voice pure ice. The paper trail we uncovered told the real story. His brilliance was just a weapon he used to bleed their assets dry to bankroll his double life. That morning, Ashley was probably a mess of nerves and excitement, thinking she was getting ready for the biggest night of her life. She had no idea she was holding the elegantly embossed invitations to her own public execution. The phone call that finally sent Aurora to the lawyers was horrifyingly simple. Ashley had cornered her at the office, buzzing with excitement. "Connor put me at the main table," she'd whispered. "Right after his speech, he's bringing me on stage." He'd sold Ashley a whole fantasy about introducing her as his founding partner, the real architect of my success. It was a textbook lie, designed to play on her ambitions so she'd think his victory was hers, too. We all saw the keynote video later. Connor, up on that stage, looked like a king. Then he said it. "And now, my incredible wife, Aurora Stone." The camera found Ashley in the crowd, and you could literally watch her smile, crack, and shatter. That's the moment a business report becomes a human catastrophe. The man's ego was his only defense. A few weeks earlier, a new analyst named Jessica Miller had noticed the framed photo on Ashley's desk. Connor with his arm wrapped around her. It was a picture of a life Jessica knew for a fact was a complete lie. "You two look so happy," Jessica had said, her voice perfectly neutral. She had seen Connor with Aurora, his actual wife, at a company mixer. That one polite sentence was the first tear in the story he'd woven. But Ashley was too deep in his fantasy to see it as a warning. We pulled the phone records. He called Ashley that same afternoon. "You get how these investors think, Ash," he'd said, using her nickname. He was turning her into a consultant for the speech that would destroy her in front of everyone. "I'll make sure every word is perfect," she'd promised him. Our forensic team's report showed that while she was polishing his lies, he was logged into a bank portal, transferring $60,000 from the joint account he had with Aurora. The next morning, the official gala schedule from Connor's office landed in Ashley's inbox. Our people got a copy. It was a perfect minute-by-minute timeline for the evening's implosion. At exactly 7:30 p.m., the schedule noted the opening address. The name printed next to it was Connor Vance and Guest. Not her name, not her title. Just an anonymous corporate placeholder, a detail that felt both professional and deeply cruel. He paraded her around like a beautiful trophy, never a partner. He was about to stand on our stage and make his fraudulent life real. All the while, the other woman was planning their wedding with evidence we would soon possess. Their entire future together was bankrolled by a massive criminal fantasy. We traced every single dollar, which revealed a clear pattern of wire fraud against his wife. The evidence was laid out in 5 thick binders, each one telling a story of complete devastation. The pedestal he built for himself only made the crash to the ground that much more epic. The trap was perfectly laid. All he had to do was walk into it. An email was drafted and ready for our board, his legal team, and the media. The 4th was for his wife's lawyers, with a subject line that was both simple and brutal. It laid out the wire fraud, the embezzlement, and every detail about the other woman. We didn't just have spreadsheets. We had the complete story of his betrayal. It was a map of his greed, fake documents, shell companies, and stolen money. Every single lie was documented, giving the truth a physical, undeniable weight. He must have sensed the end was near, shadowing her at home like a cornered animal. His questions grew desperate, and his sudden tenderness was just a pathetic mask. He kept searching her eyes for a sign, any crack in her composure, but she gave him absolutely nothing. She played her role so flawlessly that his gigantic ego never saw it coming. All day long, she performed her part with this brilliant, infectious excitement. "I have big news for the gala tonight," she'd whispered to him, perfectly baiting the trap. She let him believe she was planning some huge personal announcement of her own. The humiliation would be Richter's scale when he heard his wife's name instead of his mistress's. It all unraveled because of a single photograph on a desk, his one fatal mistake. The moment his fiancée met his wife was the moment his whole world started to come apart. Aurora left work that afternoon not to get ready for a party, but to prepare for the end of his world. It was never a celebration for her. It was a woman putting on her armor for battle. The gown she chose wasn't a promise of love. It was the promise of a reckoning. When she looked in the mirror, I have to believe all she saw was cold, hard justice staring back. "Tonight, everything changes," he told her before they left. He had no earthly idea how right he was. The 2 separate lives he had so carefully constructed were about to collide in the most public way imaginable. We watched him working the room, a king presiding over a kingdom built entirely on lies. I saw Connor Vance glad-handing his way across the ballroom, introducing the woman on his arm to men who controlled billions. He called her his secret weapon, and she played the part so well, poised, charming. I remember thinking they looked like the ultimate power couple, completely unaware that she was a predator disguised as a prize, just waiting for the perfect moment to tear him apart. 7:30. I checked the time on my phone for the 10th time, my heart hammering against my ribs. On stage, some investor named Marcus Thorne was clearing his throat. This was it. The whole room was waiting to hear about Connor Vance, the golden boy. But I knew they weren't going to hear about Connor. They were going to hear about the woman whose life he'd tried to destroy, my best friend. And then, there she was, Aurora Wallace. That name, her own name, sounded like a battle cry tonight. She moved into the spotlight, a blade of a woman in a simple black dress that made the room's gilded decor look cheap. I knew that walk. It wasn't a walk, it was a march. Her eyes swept over the sea of investors, making them wait before finally deliberately landing on him. I was watching him, of course. I saw the second her gaze connected with his. I saw Connor Vance, the man who had charmed a city, just break. It wasn't just shock. It was the terror of a man whose ghost had just walked into the room. His face went chalk white. The ice in his glass clinked, a sound that felt deafeningly loud. His poor, clueless fiancée, Chloe Bennett, put a hand on his arm, her face a mask of concern and confusion. A nervous energy crackled through the gala. Chloe wasn't the only one lost. Then Aurora spoke, her voice ringing out, perfectly calm. "Good evening," she said. "We are here tonight to map the future of urban infrastructure." She delivered the line exactly as we'd practiced, a perfect imitation of the corporate speech they were all expecting. "We are here to discuss vision and trust." Her eyes were locked on Connor, turning every word into a weapon. This company is built on absolute integrity, and because that is our most valuable asset, I have a duty to inform this board of the truth about the man at the center of this proposal. The polite chatter died instantly. The huge screen behind her lit up, not with a logo, but with a scanned document from the Massachusetts State Archives, a marriage certificate. The man you know as Connor Vance, Aurora's voice filled the dead silence, is legally Connor Dempsey, and he has been my husband for the past 7 years. I heard someone gasp at the table next to mine. Across the room, I saw Chloe Bennett's face just shatter, her whole life imploding in front of 200 of the city's elite. He wasn't her fiancé. He was a fraud we were about to unmask. The slide clicked forward, showing a web of financial transactions. Over the past 24 months, Aurora said, her voice devoid of emotion, Connor has siphoned over $186,000 from our joint accounts. He funneled this into a shell corporation, Apex Holdings, registered to Samuel Bennett. She let the name hang in the air, the brother of the woman beside him, a woman who was subsequently made a shareholder in a company funded entirely with our stolen marital assets. All around me, the tiny red lights of cell phone cameras began to glow in the dark. Another document filled the screen, a corporate filing. Aurora's signature was circled in red, a forgery so blatant it was insulting. And then, the final piece, a loan document. His crimes didn't end there, she stated. To secure a bridge loan, Connor forged my digital signature, illegally leveraging our home, a property held solely in my name, as collateral. This was the kill shot. Not just infidelity, but a list of felonies. Connor finally found his voice, a strangled, furious sound. "Kill the mic!" He lunged for the stage, but 2 security guards, men I knew Aurora had hired personally, stepped into his path like a wall. "This is a private dispute," he yelled, his voice sounding small and pathetic in the vast, silent ballroom. "It ceased being private the moment you committed wire fraud and securities violations, Connor," Aurora shot back, her voice like steel. "When you use embezzled marital funds and forged documents to legitimize a corporate bid, you elevate adultery into a series of prosecutable felonies." She was teaching a masterclass in his own destruction. Right on cue, the ballroom doors swung open. The firm's lawyer walked in, his expression grim, followed by a few other executives. The public execution was complete. The corporate cleanup was about to begin. And for Chloe Bennett, the real nightmare was just getting started. The company chairman stood, his voice shaking with cold rage. "Our auditors have confirmed the fraudulent documentation," he announced, staring daggers at Connor. "Astor Vale is terminating all association with Vance Advisory, effective immediately." A deal worth 9 figures incinerated in a heartbeat. His whole world had been leveled in under 10 minutes. But the final, most devastating blow didn't even come from Aurora. It came from the other woman. I watched, breathless, as Chloe Bennett got to her feet, her confusion replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just the cheated-on fiancé. She was a pawn, an accessory to his fraud. That cold rage carried her across the room, right toward the lawyers who had just entered. She held up her phone. "I have the emails." Her voice trembled but carried with chilling clarity. "Every text, every promise about my fake equity and our future. I'm giving you everything." She was serving them his motive, his lies, his entire criminal intent, gift-wrapped. Connor Dempsey, or whatever his name was, just seemed to collapse in on himself, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. He'd lost everything in the span of a few minutes. I didn't watch them lead him away. I was too busy watching my friend, who stood there for a moment longer, a solitary figure of absolute victory. And just like that, it was done. The tension in the room broke, replaced by a storm of shocked whispers. I looked back at the stage, but Aurora was already gone. She had cut the cancer out and disappeared before they could even find the scalpel. It was total annihilation, executed with a precision that was breathtaking. I thought back to the night she called me from that parking garage, her voice hollowed out by grief. She hadn't just gotten revenge on a cheating husband, she had become a force of nature. I slipped out a side door into the sharp Boston night, the wind off the water feeling like a clean slate. The firm dodged a bullet, sure, but that wasn't the point. I wasn't thinking about their balance sheets. I was thinking about my friend, finally free. His life was a crater, and that whole room of powerful people had almost built their future on top of it. As I walked to the spot where I told Aurora I'd meet her, I knew the first thing we were going to do was go back to her apartment and burn that evidence board. I learned what real justice looks like tonight. It isn't always something a judge gives you. Sometimes it's a plan born from heartbreak, executed in a black dress, making damn sure the truth gets the last word. And I was there to see the whole goddamn thing.